My name is Ben Friedman, and today I am reviewing the film The People's Joker, which is a parody superhero film from Vera Drew. And this film caused a lot of controversy a few years ago at the 2022 Toronto Film Festival, where it premiered, and essentially since then has been in legal battle and has been tied up. And it's a really interesting thing because that is a big part of the movie. And it's probably the reason a lot of people have heard about this film due to this rights issue and all the litigation that has been going on because of this film, The People's Joker. It's definitely how I heard of it. So I was really fascinated to watch this film for a while. It's literally been 2 years since that premiere, basically. And I finally got the chance to see it because it is now streaming. And I have a lot of thoughts about it. And it's actually a movie that's super cool and unique. So I really did want to spotlight this one. But The People's Joker, let me give you a brief summation. The film unofficially parodies characters from the Batman comics, and the main character is a transgender woman based on the Joker, played by Drew. Film also features a handful of actors, but essentially this film, in a dystopian world monitored by Batman, a young child grows up in Smallville, Kansas, idolizing the performers on a sketch comedy program, UCB Live. The protagonist's mother is disturbed when the child asks, "Was I born in the wrong body?" and immediately books a session with Dr. Crane of Arkham Asylum, who prescribes Smilex, a drug that forces its user to put on a happy face even if they feel depression, anxiety, or gender dysphoria. And eventually this character that becomes the Joker goes off to UCB, moves to Gotham City, and goes through some of the parody elements of the 2019 Joker film. I don't want to give out too much more about the plot, but this film has a lot to say about gender dysphoria. This film is a coming-of-age story for a transgender woman, and it also has a larger discussion about relationships and specifically the comedy scene tied into USB. But really in this film, it's more about Saturday Night Live and that kind of quantification / ownership of this style of comedy that makes it hard for comedians like Drew to break in. That's what this film is about, essentially. And it's very much kind of scatterbrained in that. Some people are going to really like that with the tone of this movie. Others are going to be a little bit annoyed by that. I didn't think this film was perfect by any means, and I think the scatterbrain element allows the film to have some really strong highs and also kind of be brought down by some of that scatterbrain quality where it's too much going on. That is certainly present in this film. It actually, though, kind of works because of the film being structured around the character of a Joker and being a parody of not only the Joker as we know him in the 2019 film, but also a little bit poking fun at his image in the 2016 Suicide Squad film, especially that relationship with Harlequin, and also just the role of the Joker, Batman in comics and a current American culture. They are all at play in this movie. So the fact that this movie does have a little bit of messiness and not always polished actually works to the benefit of who the Joker is spiritually as a character in the comics and in pop culture. So I did like that it did match that. So even though there is inherent messiness, it does match the framework of the character, which I did respect, and I thought that was a clever way to go about this story. The funny thing about this movie is essentially, this was a movie that was in litigation. This was a movie that had rights issues, and just due to what this film was about, what it was saying about some of the main characters like Batman and all that, specifically like there's this whole Lorne Michaels aspect of this movie, which I just talked about with the comedy scene. This is all in there. And it's kind of that funny case where if the people who are being parodied in this film, DC, Warner Brothers, Saturday Night Live, and again, I don't know the full process of the litigation or who was mad at who for all of this, but if this just kind of didn't happen, if Warner Brothers, and DC just was like, okay, go for it, like, we don't really care, this film doesn't become a big deal. Not to say that people don't see it. It would have gotten the initial Toronto run, and maybe a few critics highlight it. But generally, it's not a film that would have had any big release, I think, by any means. And again, this film is definitely a very small independent film, but it certainly gained a level of notoriety over the past 2 years as you've heard these stories of the rights issue with this film going on and some of the legal battles that Drew is facing with the People's Joker. So it all just kind of amounts to the fact of it's always that classic example of sometimes these corporations and these entities think they're serving in their best interest. And yet that actually means more people are going to seek something out. When you tell a group of people, hey, you can't have this or you can't see this, guess what everyone wants to do and is inherently more interested in doing? Seeking that out. It's the reason I sought this film out. It's the reason I suggest you seek it out. I was a little worried going into this where I was just like, is this some sort of like fan film that doesn't really have a lot to say? Like it's kind of a parody, like it feels very cheap, like I didn't really want to see a fan-made movie about the Joker, to be completely honest. I'm glad to say that's not what this film is. This film is far more sophisticated than that. It has far better performances than that. This is not just like some group of friends who went out and just filmed basically the Joker, but through a different perspective. That's not what this movie is by any means. This is an actual thoughtful coming-of-age story that utilizes the comics, that utilizes Joker's role in pop culture to say something interesting both about Drew as a person and also say something interesting about the age of superhero movies that we exist in, the role of comedy in today's culture and society, how that role has changed, how that role has shifted, ideas within that, some of the hierarchy of comedy power, I guess you could say it in that way. And that's all, like I said, in this movie. And for that, I really respected it. It's a really beautiful movie to look at occasionally in certain scenes. Like there is a very unique perspective of filming in this movie. You can tell Drew just put a lot of thought and detail into how this movie worked. Not all of it works. Not all of it looks great. And that, I mean, a lot of that comes to budget constraints. Some of the choices in there, specifically with some of the color and the color grading in there, I noticed and it bothered me at times. Other times, the use of colors worked to wonderful effects within the People's Joker. Essentially, what I'm really trying to get at is the People's Joker is a movie that is amateur. And it's really cool that an artist got to make this level of amateur art and to then be platformed by accident, essentially, to grow it in an even greater way. And by accident, I don't want to degrade Drew or anything like that. I don't want to degrade the art that she put so much time and effort into making. It's more of just saying the accident comes from her not quite being aware of how the studios and the powers that be are going to handle this movie and then the notoriety / press they're going to give this movie. It worked very well in this film's benefit. One aspect that I really wanted to shout out of this movie, I think it is the element of this movie that works the best, is the comedy of this movie. This is a very funny movie throughout. There is legitimately good humor throughout, especially in its exploration of just the comedy world, a world that I am semi-familiar with just because I watch comedians and I've listened to comedians' podcasts, but I can't pretend that I know much about the inner workings of this world, especially from the improv side of it that we see. USB is directly referenced in it, but it's definitely a stand-in for Saturday Night Live, even to the point that a Lorne Michaels character is in this film, originally voiced by the comedian who is on SNL, Sarah Sherman, who stepped aside. Probably makes sense for her to step aside, giving her relationship to SNL right now. But all that's present in this film, and what it does is it actually shows a inner workings to what comedy is, who controls comedy right now, some of the dangers of having basically one entity of comedy in which most of our comedians come through, Saturday Night Live, what that says about ourselves as a culture and a society, that this is all dictated through this one 80-year-old man in Lorne Michaels. All of that is in play in this movie. And it's a very, at times, and I don't even know how I feel about the portrayal of Lorne Michaels or Saturday Night Live and it's what it means to the culture and some of the negativity of this movie. But as a frame to center this movie, it actually worked quite well and was a fascinating exploration into a world that I didn't know and a perspective that I really didn't know people had for Saturday Night Live. And then you hear more about it, and I read more about it, and you see that that is a perspective comedians do have on Saturday Night Live. Not all of them, but certainly some of them have those feelings and kind of conflicted thoughts on Saturday Night Live. So that component of the film worked really well. I also think the relationship aspect of this movie worked really well. The character from the comics, Jason Todd, is introduced into this film as the love interest to Drew's Joker character. If I'm correct, that means they're technically playing two different versions of the Joker character. That works really well. You get to see this relationship develop. It actually ends in a really beautiful, poignant line that Drew delivers. Some of the issues that I had with this movie was it struggles from the sense that it's a parody film, and thus it feels like it needs to use the Batman iconography, which obviously I understand the instinct to do that in a parody film about Batman and the Joker. The issue is sometimes it can rely a little heavily on that. Maybe that's just because of how well I know these characters but it's just like, oh, when you're trying to parody, I'm trying to think of an example, but I think it was specifically in the Jason Todd character, and he blends into like another character in a different movie where it's just like he's Jason Todd, but he's also Jared Leto's Joker, and you see where those two portrayals kind of change and how they're interconnected and all this stuff, and it's just like sometimes that's when the metaphor gets a little lost. Maybe that's me being someone who's seen all these Batman movies and has seen them multitude of times, including the animated stuff, including the animated movies, who's read all these comics, where I'm just like, it's the case of maybe the joke, if you don't know it, is actually simple enough that the joke works. But then for me, who's like bringing all this baggage into it, I get a little lost and confused watching it. That is certainly plausible in this movie. It doesn't do anything in the sense of like hampering my enjoyment or thoughts on the movie. It was just something that I noticed throughout where I was just like, maybe this is overly relying on the parody aspects in this moment. And if they just kind of brought it back to a realness for a second, this film would work well. But there's other aspects of this movie that work extremely well. There is this actor that plays the Penguin. The Penguin portrayal in this movie is very funny. It's a really good Penguin portrayal. There's this relationship with the mother character, and obviously Drew going through what Drew's going through in her life with this gender dysphoria that she's feeling. Like, there's so much of that feels resonant and true to an experience. And again, this is obviously not someone coming from that experience, but able to watch a movie and feel like I understood a slice of life, even if I didn't understand it necessarily on an emotional level, being able to connect with it that way. I was able to understand it on a logical level because the director / writer of this movie, Drew, was able to bring this to a relatable experience that we've all had, and this kind of conflict that, parents and children can have, and explain it in that terms, which allowed me to have a logical understanding of the scene, even if I don't have the emotions capable to fully understand that scene and how that would affect someone who's actually lived that experience. It allowed me a slice of a life, and I have a feeling that someone who's lived through those personal experiences is going to find it even more heart-wrenching and emotional. And I think that's great. Like I said, I think that is the point of art. It is supposed to speak to people's sensibilities and sense of self. And I think that's wonderful. And I really enjoyed The People's Joker for what it is in that way. Again, you kind of have to go in with the expectations of, this is not like a Naked Gun movie. This is not a straight parody of something famous. This takes inspiration and style and influence for sure, but this movie is also its own thing. And that sense of rebellion, that sense of ambition that this movie has, this sense of craziness that this movie has, and that Drew has as a performer, writer, director, there's a certain sense of bravery in this movie that is exciting and cool. And it's one of those ones where you kind of hope that Drew gets another chance to make a movie like this. So I can definitely recommend The People's Joker. It is an experience unlike any other you'll see this year, and it is well worth your time just to check it out and just kind of at the very least, even if you don't come away loving this movie or fully understanding this movie, I think you're the better off for seeing a movie like this and just engaging with this type of art form and learning a different perspective and being open to that perspective. I think that is the most powerful thing about art, is that it can reveal so much about the self and who we are, and who, even though we don't always understand each other and we don't get each other's shared life experiences and we live our own life experiences, we can better try to understand each other, have more empathy for one another, and grow and progress as people together. And I think that's the goal of art. I've always thought that's the goal of art, and I think The People's Joker excels in that. For me, People's Joker, solid 3 out of 5 star movie. So thank you so much for watching this review. And if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more reviews of And It Ends With Us, coming later this week. And I think I will be reviewing the new Batman animated show that's out on Amazon Prime. I'm 7 out of 10 episodes through the way. So I think I actually will be reviewing that later this week. So stay tuned.